As we get older, time seems to pass more quickly than we can grasp. When we were younger, life was full of noise, the hustle of work, the laughter of children, the constant flow of activity. But as the years move forward, that rhythm can quiet. The once bustling house becomes emptier. The children grow up, build their own lives, and our spouses, the people we once relied on for companionship, may no longer be with us. Jack Thompson, a man who had lived a full, rich life, found himself in that very situation. At 62, he retired from a career that had consumed most of his adult life. He had planned for retirement, he saved, invested wisely, and built a life that allowed him to relax and enjoy the fruits of his hard work. But there was one thing Jack didn't plan for: loneliness. At first, it wasn't so bad. He spent time reading, working on hobbies, and occasionally visiting with friends. But as the months passed, Jack began to feel it. The emptiness in his home. The silence that filled rooms that were once filled with laughter, conversation, and the bustle of family life. His children, Adam and Emily, were busy with their own families now. And while he loved them dearly and was proud of the lives they were building, Jack couldn't help but feel a pang of longing for the days when his house was full of life. His beloved wife, Sarah, had passed away a few years ago, and with each day that passed, the ache of that loss seemed to deepen. One afternoon, Jack sat alone in his living room, the stillness so thick he could hear the beating of his own heart. The world outside was going on, but inside, it felt like time had stopped. The phone rang, and it was Adam. His voice came through, a little rushed, a little distant. "Dad, I might not be able to come by tonight. I have some urgent work. I just wanted to check in on you," he said. Jack tried to sound casual, but deep inside, a little disappointment gnawed at him. He understood, of course, his son had his own family and responsibilities. But there was something in that moment that struck him. What if one day he was truly alone? That question lingered in his mind, unanswered and heavy. It was a reality many older adults face, but one that often goes unspoken. What happens when the people you love are no longer by your side? A few days later, Jack ran into his neighbor John, a man of similar age. They had spent many afternoons chatting about life, about their families, about the good old days. But today was different. John's words were heavier, and there was an unspoken truth in the air. "So it's just you here now, huh?" John asked, looking around Jack's home, which now felt more like a museum of memories than a place of life. "Same here," John added. His voice was filled with a quiet sadness that Jack understood all too well. John's words echoed in Jack's mind long after their conversation ended. What if one day I'm all alone? It was a haunting thought. The idea of being left behind, the possibility of living out the years without companionship, without the close bonds that had defined his life for a while. Jack tried to ignore it. He stayed busy, spent time with friends, and kept up with his interests. But deep inside, the loneliness crept in like an unwelcome guest. One day, Emily came to visit. She brought her son, Noah, and some of his favorite childhood dishes. Maybe she was hoping for a longer visit, but Jack could see in her eyes that she was rushing, that her life was full, and her time was limited. "Dad, I have to go pick up Tom. But I wanted to let Noah see you for a bit," Emily said as she rushed through the door. Jack smiled, trying to mask the sadness that grew inside him. "It's fine, Emily. Go ahead. Take care of what you need to do," he said, his voice a little too calm. As Emily left, Jack stood at the door, watching them go. The sound of their footsteps faded away, and with it, the last sense of connection he had felt. The house, once full of family and joy, now seemed like a place of silence and abandonment. That night, as he lay in bed, the same thought haunted him. What if I'm left completely alone? Jack knew something had to change. He couldn't keep living like this, the silence pressing in, the loneliness growing stronger with each passing day. He couldn't ignore the emptiness anymore. It was time to take control, to find a way out of this quiet spiral. A few days later, he met with John again. They sat in the park, watching the world move around them. Jack turned to John, his heart heavy with everything he had been feeling. "You were right," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "What if we're left alone? What do we do then?" John nodded, his eyes understanding. "We'd have to prepare for it. It's not something you can ignore. The most important thing, Jack, is making sure we're financially stable. We need to make sure we're not struggling in our old age. That's the foundation. If we have that in place, we'll be able to take care of ourselves, no matter what happens. It was a hard truth, but it was the reality they both had to face. Jack had always been careful with his finances, but now he realized he needed to plan more carefully for the future. There would be medical expenses, unexpected challenges, and the financial independence that he needed to maintain his dignity. He had to act now before the silence became unbearable. The next day, Jack went to the community center. He signed up for a group fitness class. He knew he needed to stay active, to keep his body in good shape, to avoid the isolation that would come from letting himself decline. At first, it was awkward, and every step felt like a battle against the quiet, lonely thoughts that tried to creep back in. But with each day, Jack started to feel stronger, more connected. He made new friends, found new routines, and found solace in the community that had begun to form around him. But even as Jack started to rebuild, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The loneliness, though softened by his new habits and friendships, still lingered. He had made a life for himself, but the thought of facing the hardest moments of aging alone haunted him. One evening, Jack had a conversation with himself that would change everything. He realized that it wasn't about avoiding loneliness or filling every moment with activity. It was about finding peace in solitude, about learning to embrace the quiet and let it be a space for growth, for reflection, for inner strength. The thought of companionship came into Jack's mind. He had spent years building a life of service and care for his family. He had always placed others first, but now, in his later years, it was time to find balance. He didn't need someone to replace Sarah, but he needed someone to share his life with, someone to ease the burden of solitude. That's when he met Margaret. She was another senior living alone, with a vibrant personality and an adventurous spirit. Their bond was quiet but strong, built on shared experiences and an understanding of what it meant to grow old alone. They spent time together, walking, talking, sharing meals. Jack realized that the companionship he had been searching for wasn't about filling an empty space. It was about sharing life in a new way, in a way that brought peace. Margaret, too, had lived through her own loss and isolation. She was ready to embrace a new chapter, and Jack's life felt fuller with her by his side. But like everything in life, nothing stays forever. Margaret's son called her back home, and as Jack drove her to the bus station, his heart ached. She had become a comfort, a companion in the truest sense of the word, but now she was leaving. As Jack returned to his empty house, the silence felt heavier than ever. But this time, he knew what he had to do. He called his children and made a decision. He chose to move into a nursing home, a place where he could find community, care, and a sense of peace for his later years. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't what he had imagined for his retirement, but it was the choice that would allow him to live with dignity and purpose. Jack learned that loneliness doesn't have to define your life. He learned that you don't have to face aging alone. You can find new connections, new ways to live, and new opportunities to embrace. Whether it's through relationships with family, friends, or even the community, what matters most is how you choose to live out your later years and how you adapt to life's inevitable changes. Even in the quiet moments, you can find peace. Even in the solitude, you can find strength. And most importantly, even when you are left alone, you can always find a way to live fully, with love and grace.